Okay. Well, nice to meet you.
Oh, very nice to meet you. No, I was trying to get here, but a little bit before switching. Yeah, you don't want to be like scrambling to get into that. Yeah, I mean, Libya isn't a problem. Speech and stuff. No. It's just reading it. This is my favorite one. I guess he does have a sense of humor.
He still doesn't acknowledge the gastric band.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
He will. He'll never confirm that.
It's the underlying.
He does have a sense of humor. Self-reflection.
Especially now that yeah, it really is. I was in a different spot, so I didn't want to be right.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Monday. You all heard this from the Secretary this morning, but I think it bears repeating, and that is we strongly condemn the Burmese military's executions of pro-democracy activists and elected leaders. These heinous acts of violence demonstrate the regime's brutality in a new and horrible light, and we remain concerned it also reflects an ongoing disregard for the human rights and rule of law. As reports indicate, the activists were denied legal representation and the ability to appeal. The United States urges all partners and allies to join us in condemning the regime's actions and stepping up pressure on the regime and its supporters. We call on the regime to cease executions, release all those unjustly detained, and restore Burma's path to democracy. With that, take your questions.
All right. Well, I wasn't going to start with that, but I will now. So what are you going to do about it?
Well, obviously, this is just transpired in recent hours. We have been in touch with our partners around the world, to include our partners in ASEAN. We are urging, as I said just a moment ago, all countries, all partners, all allies to add their voices when it comes to the condemnation of this heinous affront to the rule of law, this heinous affront to human rights, this heinous affront to the Burmese people who have, since February of last year, expressed an ardent and sincere desire to put their country on the path back to democracy. At the same time, we are urging all of our partners to step up that economic pressure, that political pressure on the regime in Burma. Not only is this an affront to the human rights of the Burmese people, not only is it a slap in the face to the millions of Burmese who wish to see their country back on the path to democracy, it's also a direct rebuke of the appeal that the junta heard and the world heard from the ASEAN chair, Cambodia, in this case, and other ASEAN leaders who warned the junta in no uncertain terms not to carry out these executions. We underscore that with the escalating violence, with these horrific atrocities that the junta has carried out, there can be no business as usual with this regime. We urge all countries to ban the sale of military equipment to Burma, to refrain from lending the regime any degree of international credibility, and we call on ASEAN to maintain its important precedent, only allowing Burmese non-political representation at regional events.
Right. So what are you going to do about it, the United States?
So
what is the Biden administration going to do?
We are already responding to this. I said we've been in close touch with our partners, including our ASEAN partners. I think you will see more from us and from our partners in terms of condemnation. And we have made clear all along, since February of last year, that the costs on the Burmese regime, the costs on the junta will continue to escalate. We will continue to escalate those costs with the economic pressure that we have imposed and that we're prepared to impose. We, of course, don't preview our own sanctions, but all options that serve to cut off the regime's revenue, which it uses to perpetrate this violence, it's on the table. When considering any such actions, we're, of course, looking to any potential humanitarian implications for the people of Burma, who have already suffered far too much for far too long since this junta came to power. But again, all options are on the table. We're going to work with our partners to see to it that the steps we take going forward are coordinated so that they have maximum effect on the regime.
Okay. But do you think that condemnation, which you just called for again, and which you asked for all your partners and allies to join in, is enough?
It's not enough.
In itself?
It is not enough, and it's certainly not the totality of our response. Our response includes the statements that you've heard, the statements that you will hear from the United States and our partners, but the economic measures, the political measures, the diplomatic measures, and the very clear call that we have put out to partners around the world that it cannot be business as usual with the junta.
Just to follow up on that, you're urging partners to step up. I think a lot of activists, a lot of Myanmar people have been asking for the U.S. government to step up in terms of its response for a long time. In that, you've done a lot of sanctions, but you haven't done any sanctions that target the gas exports that are the main source of foreign revenue for the junta. So why haven't you taken any action on that? If you're asking for not to be business as usual for the junta, why haven't you taken any action on these gas revenues, and will you do that now?
All means all. When I say that all options are on the table, I mean that all options are on the table. We are discussing additional response options that we could implement ourselves, that we could implement in coordination with our partners in ASEAN, our other like-minded partners with whom we've worked since February of last year to seek to put Burma back on the path to democracy. Even as we consider all of those measures, we are also cognizant of what needs to be a central charge, and that is to do no harm, or to do no additional harm in this case. It's clear that the coup has done tremendous harm to the people of Burma, hundreds of whom have been killed in this senseless violence, too many of whom find themselves political prisoner of a regime that isn't tolerating any form of dissent or opposition. So as we consider our next steps, as we consider all potential options, we are also taking a very close look at any potential humanitarian implications of steps that we might take. And
you're talking about enhancing support for the Burmese people. That obviously a lot of the Burmese people have taken up arms against the junta. Do you still draw the line on military support for the opposition to the junta, and is that something you're going to consider?
We're seeking to put Burma on the path back to democracy. Our goal in this is a political one. Our goal in this is to help advance the same objective and the same goal that we've heard the people of Burma, so many of whom have taken peacefully to the streets to demonstrate their support for a return to democracy. It's our goal to support them, and we will continue to support them with appropriate means.
What if other countries, allies, partners were to offer support for military opponents? Would you be against that?
Again, our goal is a return to democracy. A protracted conflict, a protracted civil war would not be in anyone's interest, not the least the people of Burma.
To clarify, are we saying all measures are on the table? We talk about economic, diplomatic means.
Correct.
When you said that all countries need to condemn and take action, can you talk to the role of some of the major players there, including China in particular, India to a certain extent, that haven't completely distanced themselves from the junta?
Well, now is the time, because you were right, Sean, in your question that there are countries around the world that haven't done enough, certainly, when it comes to rhetorical condemnation, when it comes to imposing costs, when it comes to the core charge, that it cannot be business as usual with the junta. We have discussed the goal of putting Burma back on the path to democracy with virtually all of our allies and partners in the region. There are some countries in the region, you named a couple of them, where we have had in-depth discussions. When the Secretary met with Wang Yi not all that long ago, Burma was a topic of discussion. We've discussed it with other senior PRC officials. Arguably no country has the potential to influence the trajectory of Burma's next steps more so than the PRC, and we've called on all countries to act responsibly, to use their influence in a way that is constructive, to use their influence in a way that works for the interests of the Burmese people, and that ultimately puts Burma back on the path to democracy. The fact is that the regime has not faced the level of economic and, in some cases, diplomatic pressure that we would like to see. We are calling on countries around the world to do more. We will be doing more as well.
Can we go to a different topic? Does somebody else also more in Myanmar?
Sure.
Russia.
Sure.
There and Ukraine. There was a statement that the secretary made on Saturday regarding the strike in Odessa. Just following up on that, does the United States believe this was a violation of the agreement reached in Turkey?
So you saw the statement from the secretary over the weekend. As he alluded to at the time, Russia's brazen attack against the port city of Odessa only 24 hours after this agreement was signed, it certainly undermines the credibility of Russia's commitments to the other parties to this deal, the United Nations, Turkey, and Ukraine, as well as its broader humanitarian commitment that it made in the July 21st agreement. It also highlights, we believe, that Moscow continues to behave in ways that intentionally prevent desperately needed food from reaching many of the world's most poor, those who are suffering the most acute effects of the food insecurity that Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has exacerbated. Despite these attacks, we do understand that the parties are continuing preparations to open Ukraine's Black Sea ports for food and fertilizer exports. We are clear-eyed going forward, but we also continue to expect that the Black Sea Agreement will be implemented. We know that the world will be watching, as you heard from the Secretary. We will be working with our partners around the world to see to it that Moscow is held accountable for the agreement it reached. And that's why we'll continue to remain in close coordination with President Zelensky, the government of Ukraine, the Secretary General, our Turkish allies, who were instrumental in bringing this agreement to conclusion.
So you think this agreement will endure? I mean, despite this attack and possibly similar attacks in the future, that's how you see it? It's enduring?
This agreement needs to endure. The people throughout the world, whether it's in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, parts of the Indo-Pacific, who have suffered the worst consequences of food insecurity that Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has exacerbated. It needs to endure for their benefit. We have heard from the parties that they're moving forward with preparations to see an initial tranche of food and fertilizer move out in the coming days. It is certainly our hope that that happens, but again, we're also clear-eyed. We acknowledge that Moscow's track record when it comes to previous deals that it has struck is not exactly a cause for optimism. It harkens back to what we heard and what we saw from Russia in the context of the humanitarian corridors that were to have been open for evacuations of civilians and others from besieged cities. In some cases, those humanitarian corridors were open for just a few days, or in some cases, just a few hours before Moscow appeared to renege on its agreement. In this case, it's very clear that Moscow, as one of my colleagues put it last week, has felt the heat of global opprobrium because the world now knows, it is now clear, that rising food prices, rising energy prices, food insecurity more broadly, has been exacerbated by, in recent months, one cause more than any other, and that is Russia's war against Ukraine. It's very clear that Russia has felt the pressure. For those of you who were with us in Bali, Indonesia, the other week for the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, many of you saw this up close. The only walkout from the G20 was not by the United States, not by any one of our allies and partners, but by Foreign Minister Lavrov, who, after sitting through a number of statements of strong condemnation, a number of statements of strong concern from countries around the world who have felt the acute pain of this growing food insecurity, determined that he had heard enough, and he left the session, before the session, in fact, on global food insecurity. So it's clear that the world has been able to speak largely with one voice on this. We will continue to do what we can to support the UN, to support our Turkish allies, because we know the importance of this grain, of this fertilizer, reaching global markets.
So you said last week that Russian grain is not in any way sanctioned, or there are no sanctions imposed.
That's right.
But the Russians claim that there are secondary sanctions that impact their ability to export their grain and so on. Can you comment on this?
The Russians have made a number of claims in recent days, but also over recent months in the context of Russia and Ukraine that amount to nothing more than misinformation, or in some cases disinformation. The fact is that we have been very specific in designing this sanctions regime to see to it that food and fertilizer from Russia is entirely exempted, to see to it that companies around the world have the assurances that they need to export these products, knowing the vital role that Ukraine's grain, Ukraine's fertilizer and food from the region plays, given that it is essentially a breadbasket for the world.
Yeah, you keep saying this, making this comment about the Russians being isolated and Lavrov walking out of the G20. But, you know, the guy just has just finished up a 4 or 5 country tour of Africa, starting in Egypt, going to Ethiopia, then Uganda, then Congo. That's not exactly a picture of isolation, is it?
Matt, I think you were there. You saw and you heard some of the messages that emanated from the G20. The G20 being a fairly diverse cross-section of countries with diverse interests and perspectives, but there was a broad consensus among this collection of countries, some of the world's leading economies, that Russia should be condemned for its actions, that its actions were exacerbating and perpetuating the global food crisis. It is becoming clear that Russia is recognizing that its own actions have caused it to become a pariah. I made an allusion to this a moment ago,
so you're saying that these trips the defense minister was just in Turkey, right, signing this agreement. Now, what happened in Odessa happened in Odessa, but I mean he went there. President Putin was just in Iran. Okay, fine, it's Iran, and you might say that that shows desperation. But so you're saying that all these foreign visits that they're doing are signs of desperation of Russia's increasing isolation, because it doesn't really compute that way.
It's very clear that Foreign Minister Lavrov is seeking to engage with countries to try to stem the onslaught of outrage against Russia. We've made this point before. We are much less concerned with whom Russia is speaking and the messages that Russia is hearing from countries. The message that Foreign Minister Lavrov heard, the message that Russia heard from the G20, the message that Russia has heard from the UN, the message that Russia has heard from other countries, other blocs of countries, has been increasingly clear about the toll of Moscow's invasion, the toll of Moscow's brutal aggression against Ukraine. Sure, please.
Ambassador Power told CNN today that U.S. administration is preparing so-called Plan B, means alternative plan to transport grain from Ukraine. Could you provide more details, and does it mean that we need this plan in case if Istanbul Agreement will not work, or it will be realized at the same time?
So we are looking at all options when it comes to the disposition of Ukrainian grain, and we're working with our Ukrainian partners who are, in the first instance, responsible for seeing the export of their grain, because it is, again, their grain. It is clear that opening Ukraine's Black Sea ports would be the most effective means by which to increase exports of Ukrainian grain and other foodstuffs. We've made this point before, but there are some 20 tons of grain that are in Ukraine's Black Sea ports, ready to go, have been ready to go for, in some cases, months, and they have been stuck there owing principally to one element and one element alone, that is Russia's blockade of the Black Sea. But all along, we've made the point that we are looking at and helping our Ukrainian partners with every option to increase Ukrainian grain exports. And in fact, prior to the signing of this deal, Ukraine's grain exports have increased somewhat, given the use of overland routes, given other tactics that our Ukrainian partners have put into play. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine was exporting some 6 tons of grain per month. Ukraine is nowhere near that at the present, but Ukraine's exports have increased month over month, from February to March to April to May, and in subsequent months. So we have been able to work with them to increase those exports in some ways, but we all know that the most effective means and the largest scale means by which to increase those exports will be through the Black Sea. Sean.
Could I just, this follows up on Said's question a bit, but specifically Lavrov was in Cairo addressing the Arab League, said that promising to supply grain from Russia to Egypt and to other countries, and also blaming the United States for the impediments there, saying it disrupted the supply chain. Do you have any either reaction to his remarks or the fact that he's speaking there at the Arab League?
Let me just say broadly about his remarks, which I had a chance to see. It is a reflection of the fact that virtually every single day, senior Russian officials are putting to the lie just about everything we heard from Moscow before the start of the invasion on February 24th. We consistently heard, and I'm sure many of you remember this, emanate from the Kremlin that what was then a military buildup and ultimately the incursion was, as Moscow would tell you, the result of some perceived threat from some imagined enemy. We heard it was Ukraine. We heard it was NATO. We heard it was the United States. We heard it was the West. We of course called that a lie at the time because it was. But now, months into this brutal war of aggression, I think it's fair to say that the Russians are doing as good a job of perhaps anyone in highlighting their own duplicity and putting to the lie, as I said before, just about everything we heard prior to the invasion. Just yesterday, and you referenced this, Sean, Foreign Minister Lavrov said Moscow's overarching goal in Ukraine was to free the Ukrainian people from its quote-unquote unacceptable regime, expressing, as one news account put it, Russia's war aims in some of the bluntest terms yet. He said that in front of the Arab League in a region where, coincidentally, Russia has, at least previously, tried to spew disinformation and propagated misinformation to the contrary. Last week, once again, Foreign Minister Lavrov, he did precisely the same thing. He said publicly what we have always known, saying that Russia's quote-unquote geographical goals in Ukraine go well beyond the Donbass. They include Kherson, they include Zaporizhia, they include other sovereign regions of Ukraine. But it hasn't only been Foreign Minister Lavrov. Earlier this year, you've heard Secretary Blinken allude to this previously, but President Putin himself compared himself to Peter the Great and said that, as the Secretary reminded all of us, when Peter waged war with Sweden, he was simply taking back what belonged to Russia. President Putin went on to say that now Russia is doing nothing more than to seek to take back what is purportedly theirs. In a strange way, I think, again, it's fair to say that the Russians have become some of the best debunkers of their own lies, of their own propaganda. They're now telling the world what has been clear for some time, that this is nothing more than a war of territorial conquest. So that's why, throughout this, we have sought to galvanize the international community to stand up, knowing that anytime the rules-based international order is undermined anywhere, it's eroded everywhere. And the Russians have been telling us in very clear terms that's precisely what they're seeking to do.
I'm sorry. Did you hear what Putin said last week? He was in some sort of a conference akin to the Aspen Institute, and he said that basically the old world order has collapsed. There's, the world is ready for a new world order. I mean, I assume he was referring to the one begun under President George Herbert Walker Bush in 1990.
The same rules-based international order that has enabled countries like Russia, like some of its current partners, to experience growth, to come into the international system, to enjoy economic integration, to enjoy political integration, all until President Putin decided to put an end to that and to undo 30 years of economic integration, to make Russia an outcast from the global community of countries. So, yes, this has been a system that has fueled over the course of not only 30 years, but really going back to the end of the Second World War, some 8 decades of unprecedented levels of stability, of security, of prosperity, the spread of democracy as well. The fact is that this is an international system that has benefited countries around the world, including the countries that are seeking to challenge it. And in many cases, it's not an exaggeration to say the countries that are posing the most acute challenge to it. Jenny.
Thank you, Nid. I have a question on Russia and North Korea. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced recently Western countries were opposed to peace talks with Ukraine. Is this true?
That is absolutely not true. President Zelensky has said very clearly that this war will have to end diplomatically. We know this war will have to end through diplomacy, through dialogue. What is also true is that the Russians have shown no indication whatsoever that they are prepared to engage in constructive dialogue, in constructive diplomacy. You don't have to take our word for it. Just about every world leader that has spoken to President Putin has, in some cases, said publicly, in some cases, conveyed to us privately, that there seems to be no room on the part of the Russian Federation for any sort of real negotiation, the kind of negotiation that the Ukrainians have been willing to take part in since the beginning of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm reminded of another lie that we heard emanate from the Kremlin, that peace talks were ongoing in March only to have what the Russians claimed was a Ukrainian withdrawal from them. The great irony, of course, is that it is Russia, not Ukraine, that is responsible for perpetrating this brutality against the Ukrainian people, that is responsible for the continued bombardment, the continued military operations on sovereign Ukrainian soil. And it's Ukraine's leadership, including President Zelensky, that has consistently said they recognize this will have to end diplomatically, and they are prepared to engage diplomatically. Russia could not say the same.
On North Korea, recently National Security Council officers said that North Korea is exploiting funds through ransomware hacking. How is the United States responding to this cyber hacking criminal groups?
We have spoken quite a bit in this briefing room, and you've heard from other senior officials our profound concerns, the international community's profound concerns with the DPRK's WMD programs. But that is not the extent of the challenge that the DPRK poses to the international community, and its activities in cyberspace are another such challenge. We have released information indicating some of these nefarious and malign activities that the DPRK regime is undertaking online, in some cases, to raise funds that go towards its illicit WMD programs. We have used the suite of policy tools at our disposal, be it economic, be it political, be it law enforcement tools as well, to pursue those actors from the DPRK who are responsible for this, just as we have used some of those same suite of tools to go after those responsible for the proliferation of the DPRK's WMD programs. Yes.
Of questions, Ned. First, on Tunisia, do you have any comment or reaction to the referendum on the constitution?
Well, the voting is still ongoing, as I understand it, so we're awaiting the official referendum outcome based on the Independent High Authority for Elections in Tunisia. As we have always affirmed, it is up to the Tunisian people to decide their political future, and we'll continue to stand with them, with the Tunisian people, calling for a return to responsive, transparent, and accountable democratic governance that respects human rights and prioritizes the country's economic future.
And on the special envoy to the Horn of Africa, Michael Hammer's meetings in Cairo, UAE, and Ethiopia, do you have any readout?
Well, he has just arrived in the region. I believe we put out a statement, a short statement yesterday announcing that he would travel to Egypt, the UAE, and to Ethiopia from July 24th, yesterday, through a week from today, August 1st. He'll, during that trip, provide continuing U.S. support towards forging a diplomatic resolution to issues related to the Grand Ethiopian Resistance Renaissance Dam, or GERD, that would achieve the interests of all the parties and contribute to a more peaceful and prosperous region. In Ethiopia, he will also consult with the AU, under whose auspices GERD talks occur. He will also have an opportunity in Ethiopia to review the progress on delivery of humanitarian assistance, accountability for human rights violations and abuses, as well as efforts to advance peace talks between the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan authorities. And as you know, he will affirm what we have consistently said, and that's that we remain committed to advancing diplomatic efforts in support of an inclusive political process towards lasting peace, security, and prosperity for all the people of Ethiopia.
And do you expect Special Envoy Amos Hochstein to go back to the region soon to resume talks between Lebanon and Israel?
As you know, the senior advisor in this capacity, Amos Hochstein, was in the region just a few weeks ago. He was in both Lebanon and Israel to continue efforts to seek to narrow the gaps and to advance some of the progress we've seen on the maritime border issues.
That means, is he going?
I just don't have any travel to speak to at the moment.
And my last question on Iran, after the phone call between the French president and the Iranian president, do you expect any new steps regarding the talks between the US and Iran?
Well, it's difficult for me to say because the fact is that the onus is on Iran to come forward, to make clear that Tehran is ready to engage constructively, to put aside extraneous issues, and to talk in good faith about the deal that has been on the table for some time. The Élysée put out a statement, made clear that President Macron of France conveyed precisely the same message we have conveyed indirectly to the Iranians, the same message we have issued publicly for some time. We are prepared to re-enter on a mutual basis the JCPOA, but of course mutual means it's a two-way street. The Iranians would need to do the same. We have not yet, at least to date, seen the Iranians indicate that they're ready to do that. Said. Let me take a follow-up. Let me take a follow-up and then we'll come back.
Thank you. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Agency today said that they're not going to allow the IAEA cameras to operate until the deal is restored. Could that have any impact on the negotiations?
Well, we talked about this in recent weeks, and we noted last month that Iran's decision to turn off multiple JCPOA-related IAEA cameras responding to the very clear call that Iran heard from the international community for more transparency by offering only less transparency was extremely regrettable, to put it mildly. It was the latest in a series of such steps. We know, and the fact is that maintaining reduced JCPOA-related transparency with the IAEA only complicates the challenges associated with a potential mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. It only deepens the nuclear crisis that Iran itself has created. When it comes to potential implications, as part of any negotiated mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA, Iran will have to provide whatever information and transparency the IAEA deems necessary to allow it to verify Iran's JCPOA declarations. As we've said, we'll continuously reassess the non-proliferation benefits of the JCPOA. As I mentioned just a moment ago, we will continue to pursue mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA for as long as that assessment makes clear that a mutual return to compliance would be in our national security interest. That is to say that a mutual return to compliance would put us in a stronger position vis-a-vis Iran's nuclear program than we're in today.
You say that you want them to drop their non-JCPOA demands. Iran keeps saying that it's that the U.S. Administration has to make a decision, a political decision. What exactly is that decision that they're expecting of you? Because the administration, the negotiators, should know what Iran wants from them. They're not saying exactly. So, can you tell us?
I will let the Iranians air publicly what it is they are referring to with that. The fact is that we have made a political decision. We made a political decision early on in this administration. In fact, it was a political decision that the then candidate Biden articulated on the campaign trail. That is to say that if Iran were to re-enter the JCPOA, we would do the same. After months of painstaking discussions, there is an agreement that has been on the table, an agreement that essentially hammers out the logistics and the details of doing so. The fact is, we made that decision a long time ago. The Iranians, if they are serious about a mutual return to compliance, which they may not be, the onus is now on them to take that deal.
So what is your assessment? You keep saying they want to or they don't want to. I'm sure that you have an assessment whether Iran is pursuing this in good faith, they really want to or not. Otherwise, why keep beating the dead horse? I mean, if you feel that they're not doing it.
The Iranians certainly haven't done anything in recent weeks to suggest that they are eager to re-enter the deal. And in fact, every day that they drag their feet, or every day that is filled with nothing but silence on their end, it's an indication to us that they are not serious and that they are not ready to re-enter the JCPOA on a mutual basis. For our part, we are not dragging our feet. We're doing a couple things. Number one, we are working with our allies and partners in the context of the P5+1, but also more broadly to determine if there is an opportunity to return to mutual compliance with the JCPOA. And we're pursuing that for a reason that is extraordinarily simple, and that is because it is still in our interest to do so. In the background, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we're always conducting those technical assessments to determine when we might reach the point, and we will reach the point when the deal is no longer in our interest. But we are clear-eyed about the circumstances. We are clear-eyed about our Iranian interlocutors. And that's why for some time we have been preparing equally for scenarios in which there is a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA and a scenario in which there is not a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. That was a focus of President Biden's trip to Israel and to Saudi Arabia, where he also had an opportunity to meet with leaders of the GCC+3. But these are discussions that we've been having for some time.
Can I ask a quick question on the Palestinian issue? The Times of Israel reported that the Biden administration is leaning on PAA President Mahmoud Abbas to join or laud or speak well of the Abraham Accords, and that is to the benefit of the Palestinians. Could you clarify this point for us?
Well, what I can say, and you heard this very clearly from Secretary Blinken and from his counterparts in the Negev summit when we traveled to the Negev desert in March. And Secretary Blinken, for his part, said that we have to be essentially clear that regional peace agreements and the construction of bridges between Israel and its Arab neighbors is not a substitute for progress between Palestinians and Israelis. That is a message that we heard in the Negev. It is a message that we've heard since from other signatories to the Abraham Accords and to normalization agreements, acknowledging that the onus is on all of us to continue to strive for a world in which Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal levels of security, of prosperity, of freedom, of dignity. So we unequivocally support the Abraham Accords. We unequivocally support normalization agreements. As you know, we've made no secret of the fact that we are looking to expand the circle of friendships and relationships between Israel and its neighbors, just as we continue to do everything we can, in many cases, with our partners in the region and beyond, to support the aspirations and support the needs of the Palestinian people.
I remember when you guys were a bit reluctant to even call it the Abraham Accord, but having said that, there has been some sort of mutual recognition between the PLO and Israel that goes back almost 30 years, 29 years. So how do you expect, what mechanism would, let's say, the Palestinians joining the Abraham Accord take? How do you see it? That is different than what they have now.
I don't know that anyone is calling for that at the moment, Saeed. What we are doing is just as we work to reinforce and to expand this set of normalization agreements broadly between Israel and its neighbors, we are working towards those objectives that I outlined just a moment ago for the Palestinian people, a Palestinian people that is able to enjoy, again, equal levels of prosperity, of security, of dignity, and freedom as their Israeli neighbors. Yes?
Do you have anything that you can preview for the U.S. Economic 2+2 later this week? What will be the primary focus for the discussions? There have been some reports that human rights safeguards in supply chains will be an issue. I assume that refers to China's role in supply chains in the Indo-Pacific. Could you comment on that specifically as well?
Well, today is Monday. This is now slated to take place at the end of the week, so I don't want to get ahead of where we are, but we do look forward to welcoming our Japanese allies to the building later in the week. We'll do so in tandem with our partners from the Department of Commerce to have a wide-ranging discussion on our economic relationship and our economic priorities. I can assure you that supply chains will feature into that conversation, but we'll wait for later in the week to go further into that. Shannon.
Brittany Griner is back in court tomorrow. Can you give us the latest on the department's involvement in her case and including any recent consular access?
So this is something that, as you've heard from us consistently, is an absolute priority for Secretary Blinken. It is an absolute priority for Ambassador Carstens, our special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, with whom Secretary Blinken meets regularly. We, just as we do with Paul Whelan, we are working around the clock, behind the scenes, quietly, to do everything we possibly can to see to it that Brittany Griner's ordeal, just as Paul Whelan's ordeal, is put to an end just as soon as can be possibly managed. It is not something that we talk about for obvious reasons. I've made the point before that in the weeks preceding the release of Trevor Reed, it is not something that we talked about in any detail, but that did not diminish the activity that was ongoing behind the scenes to see to it that Trevor Reed was brought home, and we are working constantly behind the scenes to see to it that Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan, and Americans who are unjustly detained around the world can be brought home. In terms of our embassy's involvement, as you know, they have carefully monitored her trial. Our chargé was present at her last hearing. I have every expectation that the chargé will be there at the next hearing tomorrow as well. Our chargé and senior embassy officials have been able to speak to Brittany Griner in the context of those court appearances. In some cases, Brittany Griner has passed on specific messages. In one case, asking our chargé to pass on her request that all of those here in this country who are whose attention is so trained on her case to keep the faith, and that is a message that we did in fact pass on publicly. Yes, Sam.
On Rwanda, I know you don't usually comment on congressional correspondence, but I wonder if I could ask sort of broadly on the U.S. policy towards Rwanda in the light of the Senate Foreign Relations Chair Menendez's letter, which highlights concerns about human rights and political repression in Rwanda. He basically says the U.S. can no longer look the other way as Rwanda foments rebellion and violence in other parts of the continent, referring to the DRC, and also highlights the case of Paul Rusesabagina, who is a U.S. permanent resident who's detained there. What's your response to this kind of questioning of the U.S. support for the Rwandan government? You're a major donor. I think you're the largest donor to that government. Do you agree with those concerns?
Well, you're right that we don't comment publicly on congressional correspondence. In this case, I have seen that the senator's office has spoken publicly to the letter with which I'm familiar. I have every expectation that Rwanda will be a topic of discussion between the United States, between the Department of State and our congressional partners. It is absolutely the prerogative of Congress in pursuing and conducting its oversight role to ask questions of our policy that is always responsive to events on the ground. And so, of course, we are taking a close eye to events on the ground, including tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. We've said before that we're concerned about the rising tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. We've urged both sides to exercise restraint and to engage in immediate dialogue to de-escalate tensions and hostilities. We've made clear the fact that we continue to support the Nairobi process as an effort to de-escalate these tensions. And when it comes to Paul Rusesabagina, this gets back to the last question, but we do have no higher priority to seeing the release of those Americans who were held unjustly anywhere around the world, and that includes Paul Rusesabagina in Rwanda. This is a case that Roger Carstens, Ambassador Carstens, in his office are working on. We've renewed our call for the Rwandan government to address procedural shortcomings in its judicial process. We're aware of the serious concerns about Paul's health. We continue to urge the government of Rwanda to ensure he receives all necessary medical care. We have concluded for some time now there were violations of his fair trial guarantees as well.
And in light of all that, you don't think that the level of aid that the U.S. gives to Rwanda is inappropriate?
Well, this is something that we always take a look at. It's something that we consult closely with our congressional partners with as well. Yes?
I just wanted to ask on House Speaker Pelosi's potential trip to Taiwan. I'm just wondering if there's anything you could tell us about the State Department's analysis around the timing of the trip, anything on the messaging or threats that we've heard from the Chinese Foreign Ministry about a potential response or the grave impact it might have on U.S.-China relations, and anything else about the sort of diplomatic fallout we might see if such a trip was to go forward.
Well, it's impossible for me to speak to some of those elements for the very reason that the Speaker's office has not confirmed any travel or potential travel. We'll, of course, refer to the office of the Speaker for any travel she may undertake. When it comes to what we've heard publicly from the PRC, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, In this case, I'm not going to respond directly, but I will just restate our policy, and that is that we remain committed to maintaining cross-strait peace and stability, and our One China policy, which is guided, as you know, by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances. We, of course, don't have diplomatic relations with Taiwan or support Taiwan independence, but we have a robust, unofficial relationship as well as an abiding interest in maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Yes?
So you're saying that the State Department has no opinion about this potential visit?
We don't have an opinion about a visit that hasn't been announced. It is not for us to weigh in on potential travel or hypotheticals. We'll defer to the Speaker's office to speak to any plans she may have.
Well, right, but I mean, she's spoken about the possibility of it.
I believe her office has made very clear that they don't confirm or deny any potential travel. Yes?
Just 2 follow-ups, one on the grains and Plan B. Since when has it been under discussion?
Since when has...
The Plan B or any other route?
Well, I wouldn't call it a Plan B, again, because we need to put a finer point on it, the Ukrainians are seeking to utilize every viable route to export grain and other foodstuffs. So the fact is that we've always, since the start of Russia's aggression, been working with our Ukrainian partners, recognizing that Russia's brutality would exacerbate global food insecurity. So even if, and we hope this is the case, if and when Ukraine's Black Sea ports are once again open and Ukrainian and other countries' ships are able to transit in and out, there will still be a need for other routes and paths, including overland routes, to maximize the level of export. So this is not an either or, this is an and both situation.
And also, you mentioned about the continuing export that has increased over the months. Could you tell us how much of it is from Odessa or from the south or from the east? Do you have any?
Well, when it comes to maritime exports from Odessa, the fact is that Moscow has maintained an effective blockade of the Black Sea ports.
Land routes.
I couldn't speak precisely. Would need to defer to our Ukrainian partners to speak to that.
Another one on Iran. You said the ball is now with Iran, and also you added that it has been several weeks we haven't heard back from Iran in a positive step toward that deal. Till when are you going to wait for Iran to respond?
We will pursue a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA for as long as it's in our national security interest. That is not something that we can attach a calendar date to, precisely because we are always, and when I say we, I mean the collective we, the United States government, is always taking a close look at the underlying factors. In this case, it's primarily the advancements that Iran is making with its nuclear program. One thing is very certain, we will reach a point where the deal that's been on the tables for several months now will not be in our interest. And we'll reach that point as soon as the advancements that Iran has made and is making overtake the non-proliferation benefits that the JCPOA would convey. Final question? Yes.
I have a question about review conference of NPT Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which will start next Monday. First, do you expect Secretary Blinken will attend the conference next week? And what do you think is the significance of review conference this time, especially in light of Russia's threat to use nuclear weapons? And what will the U.S. call for to make an international consensus during the review conference?
Sure. So I'm not in a position to announce any travel at the moment, but let me just say broadly that the United States stands by the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We think it is extraordinarily important to underline the obligations that the NPT puts forward for nuclear weapon states and for non-nuclear weapon states alike in the face of challenges to the global non-proliferation regime. We think it's important that the United States stands with the signatories of the NPT to make clear that even though it has been in effect for some time now, its relevance, its importance has not diminished a single iota over the years and over the decades. So without getting too far, I think you can expect Secretary Blinken to be personally involved in this effort, including in the coming days. Thank you all very much.
Heard from CEO and Superintendent Escareno, Landmark Development President Bob Dunn, Chicago Department of Planning and Development Commissioner Maurice Cox, and Deputy Mayor for Economic and Neighborhood Development Samir Mayakar. Each year, Soldier Field proves to be an incredible asset for our city. From football games to major concerts and everything in between. This stadium has delighted countless audiences in its nearly century-long history. For that reason, it's easy to think that Soldier Field is a place where people go to have fun. But for our city, it is so much more than that. It remains a critical driver of Chicago's economy. The events hosted at Soldier Field generate direct revenue for the Chicago Park District, which funds programs across the city, as you just heard. But on top of that, it also generates hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity and revenue for the city and for our businesses. Just yesterday, as you heard, Soldier Field seats were filled with fans coming to hear The Weeknd, who held a concert here. And already for 2023, dates are filling up. Huge concerts like these bring visitors from near and far to our city, and who then stay in our hotels and go out to patronize our businesses, restaurants, bars, and more before and after performances. For these reasons and more, we need to invest in Soldier Field to ensure that it is able to continue to strengthen our economy and host events for future generations of Chicagoans. And as I have noted, Soldier Field must be a year-round destination. We must enhance the fan and visitor experience and that is precisely what we aim to do. So, that's why I'm excited to share that we have developed 3 potential concepts for Soldier Field. The first, ladies and gentlemen, is a domed stadium. The second is an open-air stadium ready for a dome. And the third is a multi-purpose venue tailored for soccer. Now, not surprisingly, we are doing what we believe is making a compelling case for the Chicago Bears to stay in Chicago. They want a Tier 1 stadium environment to maximize revenues, and we agree. And we are going to keep making the case to the Bears, the NFL, and the public that a revitalized Soldier Field makes the most economic sense for that storied franchise. What's also important, Soldier Field remains a highly desired venue by many. Other sports, activities, music, and more. It's important to note that each of these scenarios will allow us to continue benefiting from Soldier Field regardless of whether or not the Bears choose to stay or go, and of course we hope that they choose to stay. But should the Bears choose to stay in our city, Soldier Field will be a top 10 tier stadium with a number of new features, making it a mutually beneficial resource. But should the Bears choose to leave, Soldier Field will continue to be a premier multi-purpose venue that is able to host an array of important and exciting events. We are in active discussions with other potential long-term tenants who could take advantage of but harmonize their tenancy with that of the Chicago Bears. I will tell you that in each of these three scenarios, we will strengthen Soldier Field's role as an economic engine for Chicago for years to come, allowing us to bring sports, music, and other events to our city, and keep generating funds to run the Park District programs that support residents all across our city and all ages in our 77 neighborhoods. Now, as Richard Price will explain in more detail shortly, investing in the future of Soldier Field is also an investment in the future of our beautiful and renowned museum campus. Since its inception, the museum campus has been a site of innovation, education, and entertainment. And while many residents and visitors alike have had the pleasure of enjoying the many things the campus has to offer, others haven't seen themselves or their communities reflected in the buildings and activities hosted within it. We must change that. As we seek to maximize the potential of Soldier Field, we will also seek to expand access to it and the rest of the museum campus, again, year-round. I have to thank Richard Price. Richard, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you for being so committed to the city of Chicago. I also want to thank the rest of the museum campus working group for doing an outstanding job. The world-class folks that were assembled around this table are thought leaders who took the challenge seriously and made innovative and thoughtful recommendations for which we are incredibly grateful. I thank them one and all. I also want to thank Bob Dunn for his leadership and really bringing a level of expertise to this project that is second to none. And I want to thank Commissioner Cox for his hard work and turning the vision into blueprints that will guide us as we redesign and reimagine Soldier Field. I also want to thank our partners in organized labor who have provided meaningful input and support as these plans will benefit the working men and women of this great city. I need to thank the Civic Consulting Alliance for their constant ability to say yes and help shape the discussions into something that is meaningful. So thank you, CCA. Importantly, I also want to assure the taxpayers of this city that we will continue to be prudent fiduciaries of your precious tax dollars. The specifics of the dollars ultimately invested will vary depending on which scenario is ultimately chosen. But the thing that will not vary and the thing that we will not waver is our continued commitment to maximize the return on any investment of your tax dollars. I also want to give a huge thanks to Superintendent Escareno and your team, Deputy Mayor Samir Mayakar, and Michael Fastnock, our CMO and head of World Business Chicago, for your collective and individual work to maximize the economic benefits of Soldier Field and the museum campus, and to ensure the benefits reach all parts of our city. So for now, I'll say thank you, and I'd like to welcome up Museum Campus Working Group Chairman Richard Price to say a few words.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really honored to be here, and it was a great privilege for me personally to be invited to participate in this effort. As a lifelong Chicagoan and somebody that is very interested in the viability of the city, this was truly a joy to be able to do this. My job actually was made fairly easy because the mayor had handpicked all the members of the campus working group. They were, as she described, very capable, interested citizens in the city, and they did an amazing job. And I also want to offer my thanks to everybody in the working group who helped create what you're seeing today. They really did the heavy lifting as part of the museum campus plan, a vision of which I think we've already shared with you. I also want to thank SOM, in addition to CCA and the others, because SOM was a great partner of ours as other resources were brought to bear to help us have a great vision for this. So I just want to tell you that the directions that the mayor gave the working group was create a vision. It's up to you. Figure out how you want to come together, how you want to collaborate, how you want to communicate with each other to really make something that is special today even better than it is today. And I think the group itself created 6 guiding principles that I want to read. And this came from within the campus working group. First and foremost is to enhance the campus attractiveness and relevance for all Chicagoans. Obviously really, really important. Provide a unified year-round museum campus experience. I think we go and come today, but we're challenged by some of the weather and some of the events not collaborating or coinciding with each other. Improve the multimodal access to and from the mobility and mobility that's on the campus. We all know that that's a challenge, getting here and getting around, and that's got to be part of the solution, and we have that, I think, in motion today. And to ground the campus in Chicago's motto, a city in a garden, and the Park District's motto of a garden in the city. And I think as part of that, you've seen or heard some of what we want to do with Northerly Island in terms of walking paths, re-gardening, re-greening, and other things that are really important. And then certainly, as the mayor just said, is to harness the campus as a great economic engine for the city of Chicago. It's here today. There's a lot of good things going on, a lot of revenues being produced, but in my view, it doesn't even scratch the surface of the potential that can be here if we can all band together and work on this for the success. And then, finally, is to recognize the campus as the heart of a 20-plus mile lakefront in the park system. I mean, if you just look out there and see what we've got and have the experience of it, it's unlike any other place on the planet today and can be made a lot better. With those principles in mind, the working group developed a fantastic set of ideas to restore Northerly Island and promote nature, walking paths, riding paths, bridges, and other things, to activate various components of the campus and make the campus a more exciting destination for all Chicagoans, not just a few, and to improve the coordination across the campus, which I think is a very important piece of what we've already accomplished. Today, within the working group, we have every interested party on the campus talking to each other, collaborating with each other, creating ideas for each other. So we're excited about the vision, and we want to help the city bring it to fruition. I personally want to see that as well. A key element of the campus group was also to improve Soldier Field. And I think that based on a lot of interviews that the working group had with experts in this field that service and work on a lot of other stadiums around the country, I think that we were the beneficiary of their advice and their good counsel and their resources that they brought to us to create the vision that you're about to see from Bob Dunn on behalf of the city. So I'm excited about all the things that the mayor and her team have developed. And I think from this you'll see that it addresses many, if not all, of the recommendations from the campus working group relative to the athletic facilities. So I'm really excited about it. And with that, I'm going to have Bob Dunn come up and really talk about the important part of the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Richard. I also want to thank Mayor Lightfoot for her introduction and the opportunity to join you here this afternoon and share with you the work and the effort that's gone into building this vision for the future of Soldier Field and the museum campus. I had the opportunity to sit with the mayor some time ago and talk about this process. And what I was told was, don't come back with something that is short of world class, regardless of who the main tenants are in the building. We took that very seriously. We put together a team of our company, Landmark Development, Johnson Controls, Hunt AECom, and Clayco, and began to move through a process that we've been involved in over many years in professional sports, in particular with the National Football League. We've had the pleasure of developing the other 3 stadiums in the North Division, so this is familiar territory, and I can say for the entirety of my career, I've always felt that there is no city and there is no venue that has the potential to define the future of this industry in the same manner as Soldier Field and the museum campus. So with that, let me walk you through the process that we've been working on over the last several months, working in coordination with Richard, Martin, and the members of the committee. We've really focused on 5 main issues. And those 5 issues really start with the uniqueness of this site and the uniqueness of this building. There is only one Soldier Field. The mayor mentioned that there are 3 schemes that have been identified. In reality, there's one approach to this redevelopment that can be applied 3 different ways. And let me explain what those are. The dome scheme is where it begins. There have been many questions. Can Soldier Field evolve to become a dome? The answer is very clearly yes, it can. How do you get there? The image that you see on your left gives you an understanding of how Soldier Field can become a dome. It's basically a hybrid of how we built Ford Field in Detroit and what most recently has been done with U.S. Bank Stadium in Minneapolis. What I'm getting at is the dome is built on 4 what we call super columns and suspended above the existing structure of the stadium. What you could not do is rest all that weight on this current structure. But you can build the dome above it and then enclose so that the building is climate controlled 365 days a year. So the answer to that question is an absolute yes. Working inside the confines of this building as we know it today, Soldier Field can transform to become a dome. Secondly, the Dome Ready scheme is exactly the same as the dome scheme, short of the roof structure overhead. What's important to understand in that middle scheme, what you see in blue is new construction. What you see in yellow is structure that is retained. The reason that that's important is given the cost of stadiums today, being able to retain over 1 million square feet of structure toward the redevelopment of Soldier Field has a massive cost savings relative to building a new stadium. And the third scheme, the multi-purpose scheme, in some of the ways is the most interesting. Depending on what the eventual tenant base is of the building, to become a soccer-first building and to meet today's standards for professional soccer, the concept is to elevate the field 42 feet. And in doing so, you create an optimal sightline, an optimal bowl for soccer. It also opens up the opportunity to reprogram all of that area below 42 feet to the field level today to create community programming that we've estimated could drive upwards of 4.5 unique new visits to the museum campus on an annual basis. So these next 3 slides will give you just a sense of how do these three schemes, these 3 concepts play out in terms of the design, the engineering, the execution. So we skipped over those, but we'll keep moving. So the second part of this equation is the site, the uniqueness of the site, the uniqueness of this building. There is no urban destination district in America that has the benefit of 15 co-anchors basically in a pedestrian footprint. There's only one place that occurs, and that's in Chicago. Secondly, when you look at what is the formula for building a urban destination district of tomorrow, this industry is changing rapidly. The formula goes like the graphic that you see on the slide. Co-anchors surrounded by massive visitation. You circulate today over 100 million people in and around this campus. Visitors,
every semiconductor component used in a medical device directly impacts a patient's life. And now we appreciate the efforts of the semiconductor companies to try to alleviate the current constraints with additional investments, but more capacity is needed. You know, that's why I've been a vocal supporter of the CHIPS Act for a while and urging Congress to pass and fund this act. Look beyond the manufacturing, and we definitely need manufacturing here in the U.S. to increase our capacity. You know, we need expanded research and development as well. And so passing this act won't solve all the problems overnight, but the investment will result in new infrastructure, will spur innovation, increase supply, and this will help us solve these supply constraints that we're under sooner. But more importantly, it'll help us avoid these challenges going forward. I mean, you know, in medtech, we've done our best to manage the situation with limited supply. And we've been, nimble enough and adaptive enough to avoid major disruptions to delivery of patient care, but there have been disruptions and there's ongoing disruptions to patient care. And this puts a strain on an already strained, healthcare environment, the hospitals and the healthcare workers, as we're trying to move inventory around to cover cases. And this shortage on semiconductors is predicted to go on for some time. Investment is needed. And as Secretary Mondo mentioned, the particular types of ships that we use that are larger and are much more efficient on energy are the ones that are, the most and most critical, demand right now and the shortest supply. And in terms of opportunities going forward, shifting gears, as you mentioned, we're at a great inflection point here in healthcare, where you've got traditional biomechanical or biomedical engineering advances, and you combine those with advancements in the digital world and the appropriate use of data to really customize a therapy for a patient. I'll just give you one example. Patients suffering from Parkinson's often get a stimulator to apply low amounts of stimulation to a certain part of their brain to control the Parkinson's symptoms, which are very difficult to live with. Historically, those patients would have to come into their neurologist and get that device reprogrammed on a pretty frequent basis because the disease is a progressive disease. But now with the computing capabilities that are out there and the use of data, we can do that all remotely and actually customize that therapy for that individual patient. And the outcomes are just much better, and the strain on the healthcare system is much less. And I can give you thousands of examples like that, where the use of chips inside devices, on the edge, in the cloud, and the advancements in computing power are really being harnessed to change patient care. And in such a profound way, you're improving outcomes, you're improving access, and you're bringing down cost all at the same time. So that's the exciting part that we want to accelerate, but it's really hard right now, given the semiconductor supply that we're facing.
Thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Tom, wonder if you can offer your perspective too. We've heard a lot about the concerns in the transportation sector and engines, but also both in the today constraints, but also the vision forward to the electrification of the transportation sector as well. We welcome your thoughts here.
Thank you, Brian. And Mr. President, it's great to see you so well. Thank you for the opportunity to join this group of thought leaders from government and industry and labor on the importance particularly of innovation and funding for the semiconductor industry. I think Cummins is an over 100-year-old company. We are headquartered in Columbus, Indiana. We have over 25,000 employees in the U.S., and we work together to innovate on power solutions from the industrial sector. It's remarkable how much Jeff and I have in common with our perspective on semiconductors from completely different sectors. Like others at the table, we are facing a supply chain crisis. We are unable to get the components we need, and semiconductors is always at the top of the list. And semiconductors are really the basic building blocks. They're the steel of the 21st century. They're what make everything happen in the industrial sector, just as they do in the medical sector. We appreciate the administration's focus on the bottlenecks and challenges we're facing, and your continued support of securing semiconductor funding in Congress. The semiconductor shortage has not only impacted our ability to meet customer demand, but the technology and equipment we need to run our operations. We rely on semiconductors to power our machines, to put our electronic control modules in our engine systems that control emissions, even to make badges for our employees so that they can all come back to work. In Cummins' case, we also buy the full range of semiconductors. And I want to highlight how important that is. Jeff talked about what we often call legacy chips. These are larger scale chips. They're more efficient in his case. They're also more robust in our case. They live in engines that serve some of the most demanding applications. And those legacy chips are just as important as the new technology and the latest chips are for the defense industry. Those legacy chips are what power the trucks, cars, and many other basic building blocks of our economy today. These chips now deliver our food. They make sure that our generators support our hospitals and data centers. They make sure on the hottest day of the summer, you've got air conditioning, and on the coolest day, you've got heating. In addition to manufacturing delays, costs have escalated dramatically. So the supply chain crises and some of the effects that Secretary Armando talked about have also driven significant cost increases. We are often buying chips from brokers now and paying as much as 10 times their regular cost to get these chips, just to make sure that we can keep trucks on the road, driving inflation in our industry and challenges throughout our supply chain. And I would say that semiconductor manufacturing, as all of us know, requires high capital investments. And the return for those investments, especially for legacy chips and more basic chips, is not as high as it is for the latest edition chips. I think that's why some of this funding is so critical to ensure the kind of investments we need made in the United States are actually made. We believe the Chips for America Act will go a long way to ensure not only the high-tech chips are made for the innovation of tomorrow, which is critical, but also that these basic and legacy chips are also provided as part of our supply chain. In addition to the semiconductor funding, this bill also provides critical funding for the National Science Foundation and other agencies that will ensure that we are keeping pace with the investments made by other countries for their domestic manufacturers. The way that I think about that is that the investments made in the CHIP Act are going to move us from wringing our hands about where we sit in competition with others to actually moving onto the field and helping the U.S. manufacturers compete. And I think we all know that when U.S. manufacturers compete with the workforce that we have and the capabilities we have, we can win.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. President, with your permission, I would just ask Chris to come in here too. That last point, Tom, that you made, I think is very salient. That this is a bill that is also about opportunity for Americans workers and for the opportunity to build good jobs in construction and installation and operations of both the facilities to produce chips themselves and the larger and broader ecosystem. So, Chris, could you just give us your perspective from the ground of how you're thinking about this bill and where you see the opportunity for American workers? Chris, if you can hear us, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Thanks for inviting me here, Mr. President. We're really grateful to be here because as far as we know, CWA is the only union representing manufacturing workers at a final assembly semiconductor factory in the United States. And we have been strong supporters of the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act is a key component of both creating good jobs here in the U.S. and strengthening our ability to compete with China. Passage of this bill is going to drive a huge amount of investment in semiconductor manufacturing across the country. It will result directly in tens of thousands of jobs to help grow a key component of our manufacturing sector. As I mentioned, CWA already represents hundreds of workers in Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, right down the street from the president's hometown, who manufacture semiconductors, the only plant that we know of in the United States that's union represented. With the passage of this bill and the growing investment in semiconductor production, I'm expecting to be able to help organize thousands of additional workers. For those workers, this bill will be a ticket to a better life. I'm also glad that the bill includes key protections to prevent companies that receive the money from turning around and investing in semiconductor production in China instead of the United States. That means that it will help us grow this industry right here in the USA for the long term. And it actually goes far beyond that. This bill will help prevent us from having to face the situation where the numerous industries that depend on semiconductors, and that's just about every industry, are simply unable to acquire them ever again. So this bill is a key part of rebuilding our manufacturing sector as a whole. There's no question that we need a comprehensive approach to compete and to take on China's unfair trade practices. This bill is a great first step in putting that approach together. I hope that Congress sends this bill to your desk, Mr. President, as soon as possible and continues working to strengthen our competitiveness and create good jobs for American workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. President, we've lost Mark for the time being, so let me turn it back to you, Mr. President, for any questions you have or closing comments here.
Well, I do have a couple questions. For Tom, I'd like to go back to him for a second. You know, Tom, since I took office, there's been a massive investment in electronic vehicles and the EV batteries. I know Cummins is on the cutting edge of fuel cell and battery electronic technology. These technologies use more semiconductors. How's this legislation going to make a difference for you in terms of accelerating your innovation? And I might add that in the act we passed for infrastructure, we have an awful lot of money for putting in electronic charging stations all throughout America, along our highways and the like. But that doesn't even count the battery technologies that we need to develop other things. So talk to me a little bit about the technologies and the use of semiconductors and why that's like to increase and how this is going to affect innovation. Because I know it's a broad question, maybe not fair.
It's a great question, Mr. President, and thank you for asking it. The use of semiconductors in cars and trucks and other industrial equipment goes by an exponential scale effect. Every single new range of models, you see an exponential increase in semiconductors. I think that's part of the reason why the industry is so far behind now. As the demand increased for vehicles, they just didn't do the math right about how many more of these legacy chips we were going to need. And as you say, as we move into electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles burning hydrogen, we are going to need that exponential curve is just going to keep growing. And I would say that in addition to the fact that we'll need more semiconductors, newer versions, more capability to invest, we want to establish leads in those technologies so that we can sell those climate improving technologies to the rest of the world. That's really the way that the U.S. industry builds. We solve the problems that we need to solve here in the U.S., and then we use that same technology to export those products to the rest of the world, and we get 95% more customers. That's essentially how Cummins built its business. I think that's a lot of us have benefited from that, and we add jobs at home by building that business overseas. So I think we have a big opportunity here, but we need to invest now. The time is running out for us to get to the lead. We already see Europe and China and other places moving faster in battery electric and fuel cell electric technologies, and we have to sprint to catch up. And of course, the infrastructure bill was a big help there. I think there's also hydrogen that's going to be needed in the semiconductor industry. And we and other companies in the U.S. offer electrolyzers that can provide that hydrogen using green energy. And then we have green hydrogen, so we decarbonize the industry significantly as well. So there's a lot of upsides for us investing here in the U.S. in terms of building out that clean energy portfolio that allows us to lead for decades to come.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Seems to me that, like I joke, and I don't joke, I'm serious when I think of climate change, I think jobs. I think there's so many opportunities we have that people understandably don't even realize. And if we could just get our act together in the Congress, we'd be able to do a heck of a lot more and create literally thousands and thousands and thousands of good paying jobs. Let me shift over. I was going to ask Mark as well, but Chris, thank you for all the support you've been giving to this effort. It was a top priority for me to ensure that incentives for semiconductors have a Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirement. And these semiconductor projects, they're billions of dollars and thousands of construction jobs in each of these sites. And how are those Davis-Bacon requirements going to make sure that those jobs are good jobs? Is there a correlation?
Yeah, the Davis-Bacon requirements will make sure that people, that there isn't a race to the bottom, that there'll be an even playing field for the people working in this industry and the people working on building the factories that will build these semiconductors. And, Davis-Bacon requirements will make sure that that happens and that, no one will be left behind. And it will give us really, really good union jobs, mostly, to make sure that the factories are built by union labor and that the manufacturing is done by professional union people who really care about what they're doing and will stay on the job because they're making good wages and have a good job.
Union labor is that, all the folks working for you essentially have a college degree in the technology that they're working. I mean, you just don't join your union and all of a sudden everything falls in place. You got to go to school, in effect. You got to be trained. You got to be in a position to be able to do what you do better than anybody in the world does it. And so that was the reason why I'm pushing Davis-Bacon. And, some of the facilities, one that God willing will be built very shortly. It was announced a while ago, pending what happens to this legislation now, is one outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's going to create a whole lot of jobs. It's going to create a lot of jobs. It's also going to create a whole lot of jobs building the facilities. And it matters a lot, it seems to me. And I say to all of you, I think we're a heck of a lot stronger as an economy and more sustainable when we build from the bottom up and the middle out, because when that happens, everyone does well. Business does very, very well. The wealthy do very, very well. And I think we got a shot as we move down the line here. And this CHIPS bill is an important piece of it, to be able to stay in the game and be the most competitive nation in the world. That's what we have to reestablish. We still are in a lot of places, but we got to do it here. And I don't know, Chris. You're talking about the benefits, the workers in the communications and media industry, as well as the importance of manufacturing jobs and the country's supply chain resilience. Do you guys talk about that? Do you worry about whether or not that's going to happen? I mean, is that something, when you're sitting around, you guys actually discuss in practical terms?
We talk about it every day, Mr. President, because we see what's happening. We see that lots of industries, that, as some of the CEOs said, lots of them can't build or make whatever it is they make because they can't get semiconductors, for instance. And that, when it's another country making these things instead of good American workers, they can always stop, and they do stop. And we see this happening every day. And we worry about what's going to happen to this country if nothing is ever made here again. If we don't make it here, we can't be sure that A, it works, and that B, we're going to be able to use it.
Well, we've actually increased manufacturing, thank God, even though we've missed opportunities. But we've increased manufacturing here at home. And look, I want to thank everyone for joining today's meeting. I know I've kept you a long time here. But the CHIPS Act, in my view, is going to advance the nation's competitiveness and our technological edge. We've been working closely with the Senate and the House to finalize a strong bipartisan bill. Congress must pass this bill as soon as possible so we can get it to my desk and we can sign it and get moving. I know we just talked about it, but for the folks at home, let me explain why this is so urgent. First, there's an economic imperative. As we just heard, this bill is going to supercharge our efforts to make semiconductors. Those tiny chips, the size of a fingerprint, which is You know, so some are larger, but the size of the fingerprint that power our everyday lives in America. You know, they're the building blocks for the modern economy, powering everything from smartphones to dishwashers to automobiles. I could go on. America invented semiconductors, but over the years, we let the manufacture of those semiconductors get sent overseas. And we saw that during the pandemic, when our factories overseas that make these chips shut down because of, in the case of COVID, was a big reason for it, the global economy basically comes to a halt, driving up the cost for families all around the world, but particularly here at home. 1/3 of the core inflation last year, in 2021, 1/3 of it was due to the high price of automobiles. You know what? As it was driven, that's driven by the inability to manufacture more automobiles. Why? The shortage of semiconductors. 1/3. And even as we had that historic job growth and economic growth last year, we sacrificed $240 billion in additional economic activity because of the chip shortage. So for the sake of the economy and jobs, we have to make these semiconductors here at home. Second, as you heard, there's a national security imperative, as Deputy Defense Secretary Hicks and Jake Sullivan pointed out. Semiconductors also power our weapon systems. And Jim, earlier this year, I went down to Lockheed's factory, as I said, in Alabama, where they're making the Javelin missile that we're supplying to Ukraine to defend themselves against Putin's unprovoked war. It's a crystal clear to me that we need these semiconductors. Crystal clear. You gotta just, all you have to do is be there and talk to the workers. Not only for these Javelin missiles, but also for the weapon systems of the future, that we're going to even be more reliant on advanced chips. Unfortunately, we're not producing enough of them. Taiwan produces 90% of the leading edge chips. We produce 0. China is moving ahead of us in manufacturing these sophisticated chips as well. As we watch the US production of these chips decline from 40% of the global production to 12%, at the same time, we watch China go from 2% to 16%. And China's goal is to reach, they've stated, is 25%. They need to produce 25% to become fully self-sufficient. It's no wonder China's watching this bill so closely and actively lobbying US businesses against the bill. America invented the semiconductor. It's time we bring it home. Doesn't mean others can't do it. It's time we bring it home for all that we need for our security and our economic growth. Third, it's just not me signaling an urgency here. Listen to the business leaders here today and across the country. They're making decisions right now about where to invest and ramp up production of these semiconductors. Are they going to invest in China, India, Japan, South Korea, the European Union? They're all making historic investments in the tens of billions of dollars to attract businesses to come to their countries, the countries I just named, to produce these chips. The United States has to lead the world in the production of these chips, for our own safety's sake as well as economic growth. Let me be clear. This bill is not about handing out a blank check to companies. Commerce Secretary Raimondo will be overseeing the key investments of this bill, explained how she's laser focused on the guardrails that will protect taxpayers' dollars and interests of the American workers, small businesses, and the communities in which they reside. The bill required that I personally have to sign off on the biggest grants before they can be dispersed. It's not sufficient. I've got to sign off on the big ones. Secretary Raimondo will have the power that if companies don't meet the commitments and that they're required to meet by in this bill, she can take back the money. This includes the requirement on construction of these semiconductor facilities to pay Davis-Bacon prevailing wage, which will ensure that tens of thousands of new construction jobs are good paying union jobs and the facility is the best built in the world. And we're not allowed, we're not going to allow companies to use these funds to buy back stock or issue dividends. They have to invest. And finally, this bill is about more than just semiconductors. It authorizes significant investment in American science and technology, which I mentioned earlier. We have a need to power our economy and national security for the decades to come. We make those decisions now. And the bill has requirements that when use of taxpayer dollars to fund research and development, the companies who get those funds have to deploy that technology that comes from that R&D and the manufacturing of it right here in America. They get the money, they invest, they find a way, they find an answer. They have to invest in America and a facility here in America. You know, we're going to both invent in America and make it in America. And we're going to make sure that we include all of America. Tapping into the greatest competitive advantage, our diversity and talented workforce. Making sure technology in the future don't only benefit wealthy shareholders on the coast, but support technology hubs all across America, including historic investments in historically Black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions, which have the capacity to do so much more given the opportunity. Look, I know we could go on for a long time, and I'll be back to you, God willing, but I want to thank you again for joining me today and for the work in getting this bill to this point. So we're close. We're close. So let's get it done. So much depends on it. And thank you all for helping today. I truly appreciate it.
Mr. President, how are you feeling with COVID?
I'm feeling great. You know, I've had 2 full nights of sleep all the way through. Matter of fact, my dog had to wake me up this morning. My wife's not here. She usually takes him out in the morning while I'm upstairs working out. So I felt this nuzzle of my dog's nose against my chest about 5 minutes to 7. So, no, but I'm feeling good. My voice is still raspy. I've had every morning, every afternoon, every evening, I get a full-blown series of tests, everything from temperature to oxygen, the oxygen in my blood to my pulse to, just across the board. And so far, everything's good. Everything's on the button. And so I'm feeling better every day. I still have a little bit of a sore throat and a little bit of a cough, but it's changing significantly. It's now up in the upper part of my throat. Actually, it's more around my nose than anywhere else. And, but they tell me that's par for the course. And I think I'm on my way to full, total recovery. God willing.
How bored have you been?
When do you think you'll be back to work in person, Mr. President?
Well, I hope I'm back to work in person by the end of this week. But as you know, I've been keeping a full schedule. I've done 4 major events today, and I didn't start today until 9:30, but and I'll finish today probably by, what time is it now? I'll finish about 6:30. But I'm not keeping the same hours, but I'm meeting all my requirements that come before me, and we're making decisions on a whole range of other topics as well.
Mr. President, will you speak with President Xi of China this week?
That's my expectation, but I'll let you know when that gets set up, okay? I promise I'll let you know. I'll not be surprised.
And Mr. President, we're getting GDP numbers on Thursday. How worried should Americans be that we could be in a recession?
We're not going to be in a recession, in my view. The employment rate is still one of the lowest we've had in history. It's in the 3.6 area. We still find ourselves with people investing. My hope is we go from this rapid growth to steady growth. And so we'll see some coming down. But I don't think we're going to, God willing, I don't think we're going to see a recession. Thank you all so very much.
Feel better.
Thank you.
Really heavily. So you got the umbrella.
Can we take the tunnel?
You done, Eddie? Yeah. You're rolling still. Yeah. Thank you.
media or maybe. Yeah, just wait till we get there.
Sorry, Prime. It's okay. A good question. She. Yeah, well, I mean, basically, the thing that this vote will still hold. The voting numbers are pretty important right now.
Oh, yeah. We need to do that. Yeah, I'm sure they did. I don't know if that should be adequate. Totally understand. All right. Nope. All right, I'll tell you what, I've got my camera off, so I'll just put it up there. This week is over. Yeah. All right, sounds good, man. Thanks. Bye.
How long is that supposed to run, you know?
No idea. For a little bit, I think. Our other guys are stuck over there. They don't want to come out.
Yeah, it's coming down pretty good. Just right now in Texas. Right start.
Oh, no, I missed. $51.
51, okay.
I'm gonna try it again. Now I got 52.
was looking back there.
You got it down.
We're good. Everybody relax, we're back.
You should come that way. You're not supposed to be there, right?
They were nice enough to let us come through there. Oh, what's my stuff getting? Go down. Stay pretty wet. Monsoon. That's why I brought my camera and I was like, if it rains, it's like that pitch, and it's coming down like 3 ways to sideways.
But they actually oh yeah.
Did you talk to that mic too?
That's 1, 2, 3. That's 1, 2, 3.
Okay, we got you.
Feeling Valencia, rest in peace to my hair.
Can you hear me? Great, okay, I hear you too, so that's a good sign.
AJ, we're good.
I mean, great.
I heard, look, you remember the days when you were sitting in a puddle? It's supposed to be the electric one. Yeah, you remember that. Every kid did. I thought they did some waterproof things. So this will be finished. You'll find out.
Drop on it. I don't have drop on you. That's cute. Yeah, that's really funny. Good. Yeah, let me know.
And it's one of the Hey guys, yes. But we're not slipping past 422, right? Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it might be that great. Okay, so. Do you have that Biden stuff for me or no? It comes right up until. Yeah, they do. No, I got it. Raina, I ain't gonna make it alone. Okay, fine, and I'm using that as a tag. Yeah, I'll mention, but we don't need to follow. So let's do that. And if I grab quick links, because the bring to the start, but I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How's that sound? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, thanks. You leaving? Yeah.
Taking off road.
I know. You know what? You go to Dallas for $1.
No doubt. Right, that's the classic.
You sure to follow through? I'll probably just wrap that in because I don't think we're going to have time. If that's okay. Thank you. What? What was that? I don't want to do all that. Yeah. Thank you. What? Oh, I see that. Thank you. Yes. Now, Casey, the president himself was just asked what he thinks the likelihood of a recession is. Here's what he said, and he used the words, very, very important words, quote, in my view. Now, his aides, when they have talked about that, they have cited strong hiring, the jobless rate as well, in addition to other factors they say they're looking at when it comes to the predictions of a recession. For the president's part, you noticed there he was speaking virtually earlier today. That's because, of course, he is still isolating after testing positive.
The press briefing will now begin at 4:35. Again, 10, 11 minutes from now. This is to give you time to watch the noble speech from the president. Again, press briefing will start at 4:35. Thank you.
That he plans to be back at work by the end of the week, Casey, but of course that does depend on whether or not he is going to get that negative COVID-19 test. What did they just do?
4:35.
4:35. 4:35. Or except for all highlighting. Thank you for setting that up. So, look good. Yeah, it's a lot better.
Seriously, every 6 months I just take some and be like, these will be nice. And just one day, one day they just show up. I don't know, it's just like, it's traveling.
Two-minute warning to briefing. 2-minute warning to briefing. Thank you.
Really important.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, today, as you saw during his meeting with CEOs and labor leaders to discuss the importance of passing the CHIPS Act, the president is doing quite well and continues to be engaged in the important work in front of him. You might have heard a little hoarseness in his voice, which Dr. O'Connor mentioned is one of the few residual symptoms remaining, but I can tell you he was excited to discuss the issue and was also excited to take some questions from you guys today. As you know, Dr. O'Connor provided another update on President Biden's health, indicating that he is doing quite well, which you were able to see for yourself just now. And he continues to respond well to Paxlovid after his 4th day of treatment last night. As we have said, almost everyone is going to get COVID, and because of the hard work we have done since day one, turning around the disjointed COVID response we inherited, we have the tools to ensure that people can go about their daily life and work. The president is fully vaccinated, twice boosted, and is taking Paxlovid. His current health speaks to how Americans should avail themselves of boosters and treatments. I'm going to hand it over now to Dr. Jha, who has some updates. I don't want to get ahead of him on COVID and the administration's effort to aggressively combat monkeypox and protect communities from the virus. He's gonna have an opening. We're gonna keep him from 15-20 minutes to take your questions, and then I know there are other topics that you all want to touch on, and then we'll continue with the briefing. All right, go ahead, Dr. Jha.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm pleased to be with you again today. As Corinne mentioned, the president continues to do well. He was feeling good this weekend. He continues to improve. And before I open up to questions, and again, you all had a chance to see him, many of you had a chance to ask him questions, I want to give you an update on both COVID-19 and monkeypox. So let's talk a little bit about COVID. I want to start by emphasizing the importance of staying up to date on COVID-19 vaccinations as we face BA.5. Approximately 400 Americans are still dying every day, which, while much better than it was when the president took office, is still too many, still too high, particularly because we can now prevent most of these deaths. Our existing vaccines continue to provide robust protection against serious illness, hospitalizations, and deaths. And because protection wanes over time, it is crucial for people to get a booster to stay up to date. Most deaths are happening in people who are not up to date on their vaccines. Let me repeat that. Most deaths are happening in people who are not up to date with their vaccines. And it is critical that people get out and get vaccinated. As I have said this, and as I've said before, and I will say again, if you're over 50 or moderately or severely immunocompromised, but if you're over 50 and haven't gotten a vaccine this year in the year 2022, you should get one right away. I would not wait. Now, looking ahead, we know this virus is constantly evolving, and we can't be complacent. And we are in the much better situation that we are in today because we have been aggressive and forward-leaning in our approach, and we will continue doing that. And to that end, tomorrow, we will be hosting the White House Summit on the future of COVID-19 vaccines. There's a lot of work happening inside the U.S. government and in private industry on the true next generation of COVID-19 vaccines. And the summit will feature some of the cutting-edge work being done by U.S. government scientists, scientists in the private sector, companies, American companies who are working on these issues. This summit is an opportunity to bring people together, to showcase the science that is already happening, to highlight the work of this administration and what it is doing to bring about these advances for the American people. Now, I want to take a few minutes to talk about monkeypox, because this is, I know, also has been on people's minds. And we all saw over the weekend that the World Health Organization declared a public health emergency of international concern. So let me give you a quick update. The declaration by Dr. Tedros of the FIC, the Public Health Emergency of International Concern, was a call to action to the world community to stop the spread of this virus. The international community must work together to protect individuals that have been impacted by monkeypox and those most at risk of contracting the virus. WHO's declaration will allow the United States and other partners to better collaborate, to share data, and to get critical information out to high-risk communities. Here at home, since the earliest days of this outbreak in the US in mid-May, the Biden administration has deployed a robust, comprehensive strategy to combat monkeypox. Our strategy has 4 key pillars, and I want to go through them. First is to dramatically scale up procurement, production, and distribution of vaccines. Second is to significantly expand access to testing. Third is to significantly expand access to treatments. And fourth is outreach to communities most affected by the virus. We have been working around the clock to ramp up our response and to make important progress in short order. To date, we have distributed more than 300,000 vaccines to jurisdictions around the country. We have procured more vaccines than any other country in the world, probably more than every other country in the world combined. FDA is working quickly to finalize the approval of nearly 800,000 additional doses, and we are getting ready to ship these doses to jurisdictions once FDA has finally approved them. We have 1.3 million doses of TPOXX, the treatment for smallpox that can also be used for monkeypox, in our stockpile. And we are working day and night to make access to that treatment easier for providers around the country. When the first case of monkeypox was confirmed in the United States, we had the capacity to do 6,000 tests per week, much higher than demand. But we knew that testing at the time wasn't as convenient for providers as it needed to be. So the CDC immediately started working with 5 of the biggest commercial labs to get monkeypox testing going online, so doctors can use their existing partnerships with commercial labs. Today, because of that work, there is capacity to do 80,000 tests per week. And we are continuing to do extensive outreach to providers to make testing easier. Finally, we've been working on the ground with communities, health partners, members of the LGBT community and others to ensure that we are getting out good information, that we are addressing concerns that they have, we are listening to their concerns. And finally, we want to make sure that all Americans understand that we are continuing to take this virus seriously. We're going to continue working on increasing access to testing, vaccines, and treatments, and making sure that Americans understand what risks and challenges this virus faces and what the administration is doing to respond to it. All right, let me finally finish up by saying you've heard a lot of talk this weekend from the Department of Health and Human Services about what it is planning to do. You heard Secretary Becerra today talk about the importance of this virus and the government's response. We are committed to being not only continue to be aggressive, but to continue to ramp up our response to this virus and protect communities in the United States that have been most affected by monkeypox. Let me stop and take questions. I think I have about 15 minutes or so. And KJP, I'll let you drive the question taking.
Go ahead.
Dr. Jha, the president just indicated that he hopes to potentially be able to return back to the West Wing later this week. Can you walk us through what the protocol would be for him to do that? I think day 0 was Thursday. We're at day 4. Is this a negative test tomorrow, or are there additional precautions that Dr. O'Connor may want to evaluate before doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the CDC guidance on this is very clear. 5 days of isolation. Today is, as you said, day 4. So tomorrow will be day 5. He will, once he has a negative test after day 5, he can end his isolation. CDC guidance suggests that he wear a mask when he's around others. The president's going to follow CDC guidance.
Those of us who have been vaccinated but may have also had COVID-19, there's often the extra immunity that comes with that. But given what we now know, based on what Dr. O'Connor said over the weekend, that this appears to be the BA.5 variant, does that affect sort of what is typically sort of a 90-day window, as we understand it, where you have that enhanced immunity? Are there any signs early on that BA.5 he'll be less likely to have that kind of window?
It's a really good question. What we know is that it is true that in the past with previous variants, we used to say that if you got infected, you had about a 90-day warranty. And that wasn't a warranty, ironclad, but a high likelihood that you weren't going to get reinfected within 90 days. What we know, because BA.5 is so immune evasive, that we have seen lots of people get reinfected within 90 days. If you got infected with a BA.2 or a BA.1, getting reinfected with BA.5 within 90 days is very common. The duration of protection from BA.5, which you're asking about, we just don't have any data. We don't know. So we're going to track that very closely. Obviously, the president will continue. The good news here is the president's vaccinated, boosted. We will continue to kind of make sure that he is up to date on his vaccines as time goes on. But we don't have any data that I know of on duration of protection after a BA.5 infection.
CDC guidance is also not to travel for 10 days. Does that mean the president won't travel until those 10 days are up?
I don't know the details of the president's schedule. What I will say is that the president plans to follow the CDC guidelines as we have. And right now we're focused on making sure that obviously the president is isolated and he will not leave isolation. His test is negative.
Plans to see him in person before his 5th day is up, to treat him in person?
Do I personally? No, I've been speaking to the president on a regular basis, sometimes on phone, sometimes by FaceTime. Dr. O'Connor sees him. Obviously, we want to limit the number of contacts, right? And so to protect others. And so the footprint around the president has been small and really limited to the most essential people who need to see him.
Thank you, Dr. Jha. What is the window that you'll be watching to see if there is potential for relapse, given the president has taken Paxlovid and we have seen that happening with other people?
That's a really good question. Rebound, again, I think I brought this up last week. The clinical data suggests that between 5 and 8% of people have rebound. And that happens sometimes as early as 3 or 4 days, sometimes can be a little longer. Obviously the president is monitored on an ongoing basis. He's around people. He has a personal physician who sees him on a regular basis. So we will continue monitoring I was going to say the patient, which is true, but the president on an ongoing basis.
And one question on monkeypox. Given the limited testing early on, how many more cases do you think there actually are right now in the United States than what we know about?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, in terms of testing, we had 6,000 tests available per week. It works out to about 800-900 tests a day. I don't think testing capacity has been a major limitation. One of the challenges has been that a lot of providers have found it difficult to actually order the tests. That's one of the reasons we brought in the national labs, because physicians are very comfortable using national labs. Obviously, we want to continue working on making sure testing is more and more widely available so that we're tracking every case and identifying every case. I don't have a number of how many further cases are out there, but I do expect, by the way, that as all these national labs now come online, as they have over the last week, would not be surprised if we see an increase in cases as testing becomes more robust. That's a very normal part of any outbreak response, is that as testing ramps up, you tend to see an increase in cases because people can identify.
I guess the number is significantly higher than what we know right now?
It's very hard for me to make guesses on what the number is. And I think the goal is to make testing easy, widespread, available, so that people can order those tests.
I'm just going to jump around.
Just on the global response to monkeypox, as we know, viruses don't respect borders. What is the U.S. able, willing, prepared to do to address that, especially since this affects communities that are often stigmatized, left out of public health interventions? And then I have a follow-up Trump question for you, Corinne.
I can take it once Dr. Azarkin.
Yeah, so we have had a very global, kind of very strong engagement in the global community on monkeypox for years. We have worked with multiple countries on the African continent, where most of the disease has been endemic in the past. We continue to have strong partnerships with multiple countries around building up laboratory capacity, that same testing capacity we're talking about here in the United States. It's really essential that other countries have that as well. We're continuing that work. This outbreak obviously now is in many, many other countries as well, and so we're in constant conversations with our European colleagues, with colleagues in other parts of the world. I think this public health emergency declaration will also further galvanize global response. I'll make a couple more points. I mean, the U.S. really on monkeypox has been a global leader. We are the major funder of the company that makes the Jynneos vaccine. We, in fact, have had a very large role to make sure that that vaccine exists and has come into being. So U.S. global leadership on monkeypox, I think, is both longstanding, and we're going to continue doing all of those things to make sure this really is a global response.
Deliverables that we might see?
Well, so we're working with countries, and different countries have different needs, different countries have different technical needs. So we are right now engaged in a lot of both bilateral and multilateral conversations with nations to figure out what help do they need, what kinds of technical and other kinds of expertise can we provide.
Yeah, thank you. And if I have a question for you later, I'll just one quick, and if you can humor me later with one, I would appreciate it.
Yes,
very quickly on staying up to date, it was reported that potentially that eligibility could be lower below age 50. Other countries are doing this, offering a 4th shot for adults. Can you give us an update as to whether you expect that to be the case, or your personal reading of the data? Is it necessary for adults who do not have moderate or severe immunocompromised situations under age 50 to get a shot? Many, of course, have gone now, what would it be, 9 or 10 months since their last shot?
Yeah, great question, Josh. Let's kind of take a step back and understand what we do know about being up to date. For all Americans, it is very, very clear from the evidence, like just incontrovertibly clear, that if you got fully vaccinated, if you got your 2 shots but have not gotten your booster, you need to get that. Like, that is essential. It's probably the most important message people need to hear, is if you've not gotten that 3rd shot, it is essential, whether you're over 50 or you're under 50. Basically everybody above the age of 5 needs to have that booster. It just provides a level of protection that is absolutely essential. I think that's point number 1. Point number 2 is certainly for people over 50, and I know you guys are getting tired of me saying it, but it's true.
A precedent that it states, that it allows. And what the precedent is that any company who is prepared to go abroad, who has ignored the needs of the American people, will then say to the Congress, hey, if you want us to stay here, you better give us a handout. We manufacture virtually all of our laptop computers in China. We manufacture virtually all of our cell phones in China. Pass this legislation, and I expect all of these guys and others will be back here and say, we want for our industry what you did for the microchip industry. So bottom line is here. Yes, we need to rebuild the microchip industry in the United States, but not as a handout. Let us sit down and work on intelligent industrial policy. Let's work on a series of agreements that protect the American taxpayer and American workers, and not just wealthy stockholders. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.